Everybody, it's Brian Grenadier with the Origins Podcast, and I'm here again with Nik of the Noah Pangea Project, my friend and my mentor, and we've got a great conversation to have for you today. So, just prior to going on, we were thinking, well, what's a good topic today? And I was sort of reflecting on my life and thinking, I've uh, when in my former life as a realtor, I achieved the highest of highs, still wasn't happy. I had three cars, I had rental properties and houses and money. Uh, Still something always felt like it was missing. Then it was yoga teacher, which I love, love, love. It's my passion. It's part of my spirit and my soul. I own a yoga studio. I've been doing this now for teaching for 23 years. I'm married. We have a beautiful daughter. We have a good marriage. We have a nice house. I don't need anything, and I have money in the bank. And I still, to this day, feel something's missing. I don't know what it is. And I have studied meditation and Buddhism and lifestyle practices, and I'm conscientious and conscious, I think, in my world. Still something's missing. And I go back over and over and think, well, do I maybe a better gratitude practice? Maybe I need to do more of this thing, or what could I let go of? What's my attachment that's stopping me? And I get stuck. And it's been like this since I was a kid, since I read Jonathan Livingston Seagull when I was 14. I'm
I
like,
love it.
something, you remember that book? Something's
Yeah.
been, I've always felt like something's missing. And I know it's not out there. I know it's not if I just acquired one more thing. If I just had a motorcycle, then I'd be happy. Or if I
Right.
just got the next widget, cool yoga mat. If I found the right meditation, or if I found the right, anything else. I know it's not out there, but
In
I
essence, it's almost like what is the factor or presence that is uh, preventing me? And I use that word very cautiously, preventing, because there's nothing really preventing us. It's just the awareness within it that allows us to be present within our life's changes that really allow us to embellish and flourish in our life. But just playfully using the word preventing, we can say, was it that's preventing me from staying in the state of, and then again, a lot of people use a different word for the here, we could say. But we can call it happy, we can call it joyful, we can call it ecstatic or euphorified. And
Mhm.
the honest truth is, I love to talk about this with people because the reality is that our human essence, the essence of our being per se, is built on the not the premise, but is actually built on the basis that we can talk about it in the context of neurology and say that, when we're born, the moment that we have before we actually take a breath per se, we can look and check the brain chemistry, quote unquote. And it's almost like the baby is taking all the ecstasy, has taken the whole bottle of ecstasy. So the baby is actually in euphoria at that moment. The baby is actually completely in this state of being that is what we call happy. However, the issue is that it's not really an issue, is that based on the conditioning we then receive, based on the first look or the first glance we get from our parental guidance, based on, all these other microcosmic factors, the baby then, takes its first breath and then becomes very conditioned or reactive or responsive to its environment. However, it's already been, at the moment of birth, exposed to this magnificence in a way. And some people simply term the magnificence, being present in the moment, because that's what stimulates the. We'll look at it on the more simple level of happy, in the sense of happy is the most complex and most simple thing we can talk about, because happiness as a word is, it's a sacred word in a way, because happiness truly is something that is something so very the depth goes beyond, we could say. When we look at something, someone, anything that is in a state of happy, happy truly is, it's embodied joy and pride. If you want to look at it from that perspective. But happiness truly is something that when we actually look at it, we look at the word and people, they tend to misuse this word. I still remember this from one of your circles, your teaching circles that you actually ran, when you basically talked about this concept of an individual meeting per se, this state of happy in a way. I'm using the word happy, and there's different words used in the past, so I'm worried about that. But again, the terminology is not as important. It's more like we use different words to describe the same thing. And you can look at this from like the multicultural aspect or the different religions, different spiritualities aspect, the scientific aspect. You look at it from any realm, any realm. And I like to use the balance of what we call the modern now, in a sense, which is using the terminology of what we hear on a more everyday basis to keep it relatively simple, but also realize the depth within it. And that's, the conquest of happy is having that depth allows for the happiness to arise naturally. And that's a little bit more philosophical than I would typically get, because that, tends to draw a little confusion. But the context of it is that once someone has been submerged into that state of happy, we're going to just leave it at happiness right now. And I've described it, a little bit in a couple different ways. But the context of it is once someone has been submerged in the state of happy, everything we do in life that comes after that is chasing or seeking that state again. It's an addiction, we could say. We call it evolution, the playful way of science, which is real. Evolution simply being that, it's a funny evolution in many ways because we're birthed in that state. However, the context of it is that the things that step in what we perceive as our way that tend to block us from that state, in a sense, we have an innate sense within our evolutionary body, we could call it our evolutionary self, our core, our animal self, the part of us that is symbiotically interconnected with others, per se. We can use many different terminology. The most simple way to look at it instinctually. Instinctually, we have the awareness of happy and the experience of happiness embodied from that momentary birth, per se. And then from there, we start hitting these, what we could say is perceived roadblocks to maintain that state. And the thirst that naturally comes, or the conquest of life that naturally comes for everybody, this is for every single human being, everybody, is to maintain that state. Now, an animal does a great job of it because an animal will just maintain that state naturally because they'll only listen to their instinctual capacity. And their instinctual capacity will lead them towards safe. And I can break that down because there's been many misstudies on this context of fight or flight. And, that has totally misjudged the animal, per se, that actually lives in perfection because they're in the perfection of balance being invoked by humans. So yeah, if you go study the animal, your awareness, per se, your presence has an effect on that animal, which is the thing that I find so funny because the reality is that, yeah, our awareness is pervasive to the point that if you're a human and you have some skittishness in you, the deer isn't comfortable around you. The bear isn't comfortable around you. And you're only going to perceive this animal in a certain way because when you witness it, that's why watching National Geographic is real in one way. But I'm not looking, from a sense of a conspiracy theory, but we can say a conspiracy theory here. The context is, when the gorilla is left alone, the gorilla acts very different than when man tends to intercede in the study of the gorilla. Because now there's, even if you left a camera up and you're witnessing the gorilla, say, and this is a little metaphysical, but the concept is simple in the sense that you're still present, your presence is still there because you're still witnessing, or the gorilla is still being witnessed, or this will be a more dissimilar explanation that can be kind of thrown out or kept depending on the individual. But the context of it is that the pervasiveness of our awareness is still present. So the gorilla still senses that, hey, I'm being watched by a skittish or scared or by a unstable human who's not, happiness embodied. So I don't actually feel comfortable. So the video that you'll actually receive is of an uncomfortable gorilla in comparison to, somebody who is, let's say, goes out on a hike on their own and is happiness embodied and meets the gorilla without the camera. They'll have a totally different experience with the gorilla because of the fact that they'll meet the gorilla in the gorilla's nature. And the nature of the gorilla is a little bit different than how we as humankind, we could say, perceive the animal to be, because the animal is actually in perfect symbiosis or in the perfection of their, we could even say, quote unquote, their meditation. I use that word playfully, but their presence is here. They aren't going anywhere else. So they've achieved what a lot of people will talk about as, being in flow. I call it symbiosis, but being in flow is one in symbiosis, which is one in, being happy. But it's like, how do we get there? How do we maintain it?
Right.
How do we sustain that state?
Right. And it's interesting because like when I teach, I'm in a state of flow. My
Yeah,
phone's off. I've got that 1 hour to focus entirely on somebody else, their and somebody's else and their needs, and to make them happy and be in that state. When I'm teaching, words come through me for people. I don't even think about it. The
right.
poses come. It just comes through, and I'm like a vessel.
Yeah.
But that's
And
1 hour out of my day.
part of that's due to the need, right?
The
You
what?
feel the itch of the individual that comes. So we'll put it this way, Brian, to break your life down to a certain extent, playfully break it down. It's almost like at birth you experienced a pure state,
Yep.
and we can use the word state, but we'll just say you experienced happiness, not pure happiness. We'll have pure happiness. You experienced pure happiness. Then the moment you looked at your mom, the moment you looked at your dad, the moment you looked at, wherever you're born, hospital, doctor, or whatever it may be, you start integrating different perceptions. Right away, that wheel starts to spin. Many words are used in many spiritualities for what that is called per se, but
Mhm.
we don't really have to jump into the wording. It's more or less we get distracted because we get the sense of, whoa, I hear you and I hear you. And by hear, it's more I sense and I feel you. Your animal instinct kicks in. But then you externalize. And then through that initial externalization, we almost forget that innate sense of happy. But because it's integrated within us, we can't actually forget it. So whether it's conscious or subconscious, the human nature is then I've got to get back to that place. I've got to get back to that state, no matter what it takes. No matter what it takes, I've got to get back there. And either I'll get back there on my deathbed, per se. And that's why, if you look at all the studies for individuals who've had near death experiences or who are, in the experience of death, and you look at the neurochemistry, it goes back to that. It's basically you're on more drugs than a man, quote unquote, because your brain it gives a full release. So when someone is about to die or thinks they're about to die, not just thinks, but they're actually in a situation that can put them in a place where it feels like, and they think it at the same time. There's enough of a factor of environmental and internal coherence to be like, I'm about to die. Their brain will then release a full sense of, we can call it neurochemistry, your dopamine levels, your serotonin levels, your GABA levels, all the different different little neurochemicals that we have are released at once, and brain is open to the sense of, oh yeah, i'm I'm back to my nature. And when I'm in my nature, I'm who I was.
Mhm.
And the simplicity, that's like when you're teaching, as Brian is someone who is experienced happy. But the difference between Brian and someone else is that, initially you brought up a really, I'll go linear with it. You brought up a really awesome little segment of your life, which is, the real estate part of it. And if you look at your life on a linear perspective, it's almost like the real estate, it was the initial initiation into saying, fuck it, I'm going to be happy. And
Mhm.
we can edit as we edit. But at the same time, the strength of the draw per se towards I'm going to be happy, and happiness is we call winning. We can put the two in the same terminology, because when you're in that state of winning, it is happy. You are happy. There's the truth. I mean, the human truth is, you look at individuals who have, whether it be drug addiction, gambling, this, that, or whatever it may be, is that individual's in a state of where they're seeking a win in a no matter what way. Whether the drug helps induce the feeling of the win, and they're just winning because they're alive, which is an ideal, or whether they're gambling and they actually win, they get a win, the finance win, or you look at it in the context of real estate. You look at it in the context of real estate, you get the sale. And when you get
Mhm.
the sale, you get that immediate sense of win, that achievement.
Yeah.
Now, the win itself is actually just a memory. It's a memory of how things used to be, of the inert self that we are. So that's the innate sense of memory, we could say, that's inbuilt within us. And it's a memory that's deeper than what we call the mind's sense of memory. The mind sense of memory is a compilation of the story of our life. And that changes in, every moment. And we know that because we know how memory fluctuates. The linearity of the story of our life is safe, but the context of it is that when we're happy, when we get that state of happy, we're present. We're actually living in our memory. So what it is that we go through a natural, almost upside down, sideways, especially in our modern society. This is very particular to our modern society. We go through a sideways, upside down mechanism of evolution because we actually experience the happy, right away. And then we have an integration within it. And that integration that we have within it is the fact that we've experienced it. Now, how long we experience it for, X, Y, and Z, those are all different factors we can talk about different individuals. Good is different for each individual. And, we are who we were is a big statement to make in a sense of, we all have different personalities of expression, we could say, or ways of being. Another way to put it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not like when everybody reaches happiness per se, or, finds that sense of happiness, we all start acting the same. That's not true at all. Everyone acts differently. Everyone will behave differently. Everyone will embody themselves differently in that state of maintaining the happy. However, the initial state is that we've experienced it. Once we've experienced it, then anything that has jumped or stepped in our way, which modern day, healing processes, or I smile with it because, the seeker is kind of in everyone nowadays, which is kind of cool. That's why I shy away from using a lot of these words like the seeker, even the word spiritual, or, things like that. Is just simply because everyone's looking. I mean, everyone's a scientist in the way of observation nowadays, because we're all observing how we feel. I mean, we may not all talk about it. We don't necessarily need to all talk about it, but at the same time, it's like we're all, as human beings, collectively at this point in human evolution, aware of how we feel, aware of the fact that there's a mind that's present, and that mind is observationally aware of a body, and that mind, per se, being observationally aware of the body, is aware of the sensation that moves through the body that we're in. And we're aware of discomfort, we're aware of the what we call the emotions that we feel. We may not, depending on the individual, we may have names for them, we may not have names for them. We may call it a buzzing sensation, we may not. We may not even be aware of the fact that the buzzing sensation is present, but we're reacting to it because there is part of us that is aware of it. And then there's the part of us that is immersed and happy, saying, I still have this, major memory from birth or whenever when I remember happy. And then depending on the individual, depending on their path of life, how many times and how deeply they've been immersed in that will judge the level of discomfort, suffering, and struggle in their life when they resist what we could call the microevolutionary changes that occur when one moves toward or back to the state of happy. Now, the complexity here is that the nature of the being, when you're aware, you can move at an exponential rate. The more aware one is, the quicker, per se, someone can embody and maintain that state of happy. The less aware someone is, they'll do it what we call more subconsciously. They'll still do it, but they'll work the job for 10 to 15 years, even though their evolutionary clock tapped them out 1 year in. 1 year in, there was a hit that he got in a sense of they like the real estate's a great example. Sold the house, whatever it may be. You get the hit. And then depending on the individual, how quickly they integrate the hit, they'll integrate it. And then they're actually done with experience. We're ready to move to a new experience of life because life is transient and it's experiential. So they're ready for the new experience. However, what stands in their way, per se, is what some will term as trauma, or some will term as, roadblock, or, whatever you want to call it. But it's whatever it was in the mental state that began the consciously aware is ideal, but the mental programming of I would call it the imaginative mind, where I'll use a more modern psychological terminology with it from psychosynthesis, but the whole context is people call it trauma. They'll say, I have to work through my trauma, I have to work through my block, I have to work through my whatever it is, which isn't necessarily untrue, but it's not really working through them. It's actually being aware of the fact that your system is just simply trying to become who you were. It's trying to evolve. I mean, it's a funny way of putting it, but it's trying to evolve back into who you were. Not that you can de-evolve, it's just kind of the nature of life, which is a really it's an exciting one, and it's a big one to talk about. We can talk about that maybe in another podcast. It's just the nature of life itself and how interesting it is that we are, have an inevitability of evolution through life and in life. Yet at the same moment, that inevitability of evolution that's present, that means we can't go back, in a sense, in a good way. We won't turn back into who we were in the way that we dislike it. However, our nature of evolution does have an evolutionary context of a circle where what our goal in life is, and this is for every human, and some will get a little perturbed by it. So I'll be very gentle with how I say it, is getting back to that state of happy, because we have a memory of it. We've been exposed to it. So it's like on your end, the real estate, starting there, it's like the real estate was initially the sense of conquest, and a sense of conquest coming to prove myself, to make money, to be successful. And I know that, based on some of your stories, I know that you're quite successful. You're quite good at what you do. People liked you. You were charismatic. You are charismatic, but you were charismatic. You had kind of all the ducks in a row to be a great real estate agent in a sense. And you did it, but you did it to the point that um, I know in prior stories that you've told, you've talked about how, you even made the realization when you're driving your new car and it got the little, you know,
Hit
the
by a rock.
get hit by the rock, hit by the truck in front of it. I know, still remember the whole story. I don't want to put it out there for you. But when that happened to you, in a sense, that was your shakeup of, what the, in a way, that was your shakeup of like, I'm not like I've won in a certain way, but I'm like looking at my life, like, I mean, dad would be proud of me because I got, the money sheet here. I've got, the house is selling, sold, and got my own, stuff going. I've got the car, I've got the whole shebang in a way. But at the same time, like you said at the initial part of the conversation, I'm not in that state. I'm not in the happy.
Right.
And the realization that you had, luckily, being aware of the point that you are, at some point later in your life, when you looked back, you realize that the real estate game ended well before the car because your system, and this brings us back to a little more of the linear discussion that we are talking about, but your system getting back to happy, being the evolutionary process, had already taken the step and integrated the experience. So once it had taken a step and integrated the experience, it was ready for the next experience. It's ready for saying, okay, give me the next experience of life to keep me in, per se, that symbiosis, to keep me in that flow so that I can self regulate. And I can regulate, is actually the way to put it, myself in the state of happy that I know so well is within me. And for you, it's a little bit different because you became conscious of it later, where some don't. They'll live their whole life and they'll wait until the 13th birthday of the career or whatever it may be, and then they have the explosion. The stress becomes too much, the frustration is too intense, and they're like, you know what? I'm done. I got to make a change. I have to change. I think you've used this quote from whether it's from Buddhism or whether it's just in general, you've used the quote, but I know you've used the quote that the change begins to occur when we notice, when we notice suffering.
Mhm.
That's the greatest. Now, the key is that we're always suffering in a way until we're aware of our happy. So we are in our happy, not even necessarily aware of our happy. It's actually, we are actually immersed within that state, you could call it. And when we're immersed within that state, we live that way. However, since we've all tasted it, we're all inevitably going there. It's just how quickly can we get there? Because life is so beautiful and so fun, but it's only so beautiful and so fun when we're there.
Yeah. In that moment of flow, in that flow state, you know, you know, and nothing else exists. It's beautiful. And in reality, like when, from 30,000 feet, when you step back or step above, um, every challenge I've ever had was perfectly designed to get me to the next step. Every up, every down, every neutral was perfectly designed. But
It pushed you to a point up. Yeah.
yeah, but when you're in it, doesn't feel like that. And it's hard to sort of maintain that. And so I feel like we live in a society that pushes just buy more stuff and you'll be happier, just
Yeah.
acquire more, do more, you'll be happier. And that's all, none of that works. I mean, and ultimately people figure that out. It doesn't matter how, if oh, I got my brand new car, then you want another one.
You got the hit, right? When you get the brand new car, you got the
Sure.
hit.
Yeah, and even the shopping for the brand new car, you get a hit.
Oh, definitely.
The acquisition is always a letdown because it's never quite the way,
Absolutely.
you
And
drive it and then you're like, well, I guess I'd change this.
yes, exactly. And that's because it's not even, I guess I'd change this, but the reason that the mind goes there is simply because the the hope is misplaced.
Yeah.
But, go ahead.
But none of it delivers. And how do you get back? It feels like once you've had that initial experience and it's sort of hardwired into your brain somewhere in your amygdala or wherever it is,
Yeah.
and you understand what that happiness is, you know, the minute you start crying, you're saying, "Hey, I'm unhappy. Somebody fix it."
Well,
And that,
you know what happens. We all, and that's a great point to make. Is that we all know what happiness is.
right.
You know
And
how we
we
all
all know what happiness isn't, but we spend more of our time in the isn't.
yes, yeah, you beautiful way of describing it. It's the simplicity of it is actually it's kind of just like you said. We all know what happiness is because we've had that initial experience, and like I love how you put it, it's hardwired into us because that's that integration process that people talk about. We integrate it very quickly that we've had this experience, whether it just be at birth or whether someone had it occur, through whatever mechanism of life that they're living, it occurs again where they reach that state per se. However, when we are anywhere else besides that state, we're aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
we know
that
what. Yeah, there's this favorite phrase of mine. This guy goes to a guru, and he says, "I'm unhappy. What do I do? I've got this. I've got this. I've got this, and but I don't know who I am." And the guru sits back and says, "Then stop being who you're not." Oh yeah, I forgot
yeah, yeah.
that.
And
Stop being who you're not.
there's such beauty to that because that is that terminology of we are who we were, which is kind of my motto in the
Right.
sense of we are who we were in a big way, in a very grand scheme of things. There's something it's much bigger because when we reach that state of happy and it integrates what people in modern day call the ego, there's such beauty in the expression of our personality. We all look and act and behave so differently as humans, yet so coherently that there's so much beauty to it. And there's so much love in our life, per se, that it's just embodied within it.
But we don't see it day to day.
You don't see it day to day. And when we don't see it day to day, that's the trap because it's there, but we don't see it because of the fact that we're looking for it. And the
Yeah.
fact that we're looking for it is simply the fact that, um, that's the complaining, that's the griping, that's the frustration, that's the agitation that most people live with is that sense, that itch, people call it. Um, it's within all of us, and some give up very quickly. They give up we could say, and those are the individuals that will work the job for 30 years and have the midlife crisis and be like, holy shoot, I've worked 30 years at a job that I just realized that I don't like. It took me 30 years to realize this because they initially were seeking. And as a seeker, they hit a point where they experience some sense of happy and they stop.
Or
Or
happy enough anyway.
yeah, I mean, yeah, and the thing is that they when they hit it, they hit happy because they wouldn't stop if they didn't hit happy. But they hit happy. It might have just been for a moment when they got hired. It may have been for the first paycheck they got, first time they went home, whatever it was. There's some sort of connection that occurred within them at that moment, and they got that achievement, we could say. Now, how long it takes that individual to integrate it and how conscious they are during that state of integration is the key to maintaining that state of happy. And for a lot of individuals, they're not conscious of it. So what ends up happening is they go through what we call suffering because they are so dissatisfied and they're aware of the dissatisfaction because they're aware of the dichotomy of being happy and being fully immersed within it. And then also hearing a lie, we could say, which is the imaginatory mind. But that's what people call, transcendence of the ego or growth or something, trauma, in that sense, or however you want to look at it. But it is in the transcendence or the shift of the mind holding on to the past in some sort of way that's disallowing us to embody ourselves fully within the present moment, in the present, that takes us to the place of what someone would call unhappy or dissatisfied.
Okay.
when the
So
nature of the being is, that we'd say, happy.
got it. So we're born with happy. We are born with that state of bliss. We understand it fully. And then society says, well, this is how you get happier, because we get further and further, as life goes on, the roles we play, things we learn, but our world says this is how you get happier, this is how you go back to it. And we're in a state right now where there's more people on antidepressants now. The marijuana is legal in most of the United States. Most people, there's a lot of people self-medicating because they know that they're far from it. They wouldn't have to self-medicate if they were happy.
Great word to use, self-medicating.
Yeah.
Right?
And we self-medicate with our phones, with our computers, with movies, with porn, with sex, with drugs, with TikTok and YouTube and all these other things. It's all self-medicating. It's numbing out. How do you get there then? How do you get back? How do I find my way back to that?
Yeah.
What steps do you take?
So I love it. So we'll use your life as an example playfully.
Sure.
And we'll say, as a real estate agent, what happened is that, well, I'll give you this. I'll give you the direct answer, and then we'll reapply it. And when we reapply it, we can kind of see it kind of break down. And what this would be is living within evolution compared to resisting evolution.
Okay.
Now I'm using the word evolution because evolution is occurring in a sense of change or growth within us in all ways at all times for all individuals. It's an inclusive term in comparison to a lot of terms being used. But people could also call it flow, or they could call it all these other things. But we also deem flow, dependent on the individual. We deem flow something else a lot of times because flow can be something sacred when flow is interlinked with the moment.
Yeah.
So the consciousness of it is, for Brian Grenadier, he was, seeking happiness unconsciously initially. And the initial unconscious seeking happiness was through real estate, being a real estate agent. Now, having the accomplishments and having the boxes in a way checked, in a sense, we could say 1 to 2 years into real estate. We'll say Brian again had to go through the path, but we'll say 1 to 2 years into real estate, Brian realized very quickly at a integritous level, maybe not through the mind, maybe not through awareness, but at a deeper level. We could even say through that level that we call integrates the happiness, or we could even say through your nervous system, or hardwiring is the word that you use, which is a great word. Through your hardwiring, you say, you integrate that I've had this experience of real estate. Now, the experience of real estate is symbolic of so many different things, and we don't have to get into that. That's more of a deep dive just in philosophy. But the context of it is that, let's say 1 to 2 years in, Brian hit a certain point where his experience of real estate was done in the context of its relationship to his microevolution back to happy. However, due to fears of the misguided ego, we could say, which is really the mind. It's not really, ego itself. Ego is actually very safe in the state of happy because that's what gives us our personality and our grounding and our whole sense of identification, per se, as an embodied being, is having an ego. But it's having the like a fully pervasive awareness within the ego that is the dot within the triangle, we could say. Now, the context of it for Brian is that for Brian, he hit a certain point 2 years in, let's say 1 year in to real estate, where he integrated that this is the gift of this achievement and of winning and of conquering and of all this. This is not integrated in me. And I'm ready to take, it's like standing on, it's like crossing the river. And when you're crossing the river, there's stones in the river. And you're stepping on stone after stone as you cross the river. And what happens is that, you step on a stone until you have the something to take another step to the next stone. And by the something, it means in ideal, you have the happiness to, hopscotch your way down, hopscotch your way through this.
Yeah, I'm chasing something.
Right. Yeah. You're hopscotching away. And that's living in flow, living in symbiosis because you're happy and you're hopscotching. And yes, you are going to reach the other side and there is something on the other side, you know, and that's a reality, a dissimilar reality in a way that is a little more real. And we can talk about that. That's a sense of presence or that's a little bit, that has more depth to it. However, the context is while you're hopscotching your way, when you pause on a stone, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that, let's say, inside your intuition, your instincts, your heart, your dream, your whatever you want to look at it as part of your being is saying, take the next step. I mean, you're halfway through the stream, or quarter way through the stream, take the next step on the stone, but then you hold yourself back. You don't take it. And when you don't take it, you stand there and you wait until. And that until can be any type of sensation that arises. For some, it might be frustration, anger, angst, fear, dependent on how whatever it is and how long they're waiting on that stone. But basically, they'll prompt themselves through what would be called suffering to put themselves in enough of a hell that they have to take the next step, per se, rather than just having taken it. So we could just look at it again from the context of the real estate. It's almost like 2 years in, you hit a point where you have now integrated the win. And your system tells you, all right, next stone. Because next stone is getting closer to the everlasting happy, which is the full state of embodied evolution, we could say. So when you hear next stone and then you don't take the step to next stone, what ends up happening, basically, I'll simplify it even. Your leg will automatically move to take the step to next stone. When you resist that natural movement, because that's the natural evolution of happy, is just you're about to jump to the next stone. And when you resist it, per se, that's the implementation of what we call the ego or the attachment or what a lot trauma. Those are some of the words that will be used for it, where the mind latches on to something that's not necessarily real, so we don't actually take that next step right away. So what happens is we stand on the stone and we get wrapped up in this, mental perturbation that leads to a sense of, we could say, paranoia. And that paranoia can exist in the sense of frustration, worry, concern, anxiety, whatever it is. But however it exerts itself, it gives some inertia. And that inertia is just, take the next step, which might be 7 more years or for some people, 30 more years of working as a real estate agent before there's enough inertia built up from the amount of agony and suffering for someone to say, all right, I'll take the next step. And I'm ready to do it. Rather than the individual just skipping and, taking the step right away, quote unquote, in flow.
Right.
So go ahead.
So I was going to say, when I was the first 5 years for me in real estate, it was all about banging on doors and cold calling and who's my next paycheck and how can I get more deals done.
Mm-hmm.
I got very dissatisfied with that, but I still liked the vehicle. So I gave it a paint job and I said, hey, I'm going to see how many people I can help, not how many paychecks can I get. And I doubled my sales and made more money. But because my attitude was different, my intention was different, my set of goals was different. It was very pleasing. But then then after that 5 years, it got hard again, and I realized I couldn't do it anymore. And so
by hard, what you're describing hard is like the emotional baggage, correct?
Yeah. My heart wasn't in it, and I just didn't want to do it. And
you weren't smiling every day to get up to do it.
No, and I was struggling with the stress and the pressure of it, and I wore out. So made the transition, yoga teacher. Then a couple of years later, yoga studio owner. Next stone.
Yep, you got it. Yep,
so I've been doing this now for teaching for 23 years.
Yeah.
And when I think about what's the next stone, is it to do something outside of yoga? Is it something else? I got nothing. I ask, I pray, I think about it. I get crickets. So I'm thinking it's not about jumping to
That's a
another
step.
river, it's
Yeah.
like it's like let's get focused on this
Yeah.
river more deeply. And
That's yeah.
is that
That's the mind's mental attachment that we talked about. That's what would be called attachment or ego nature stepping in or trauma or a block. You know, some people will call it.
so? Am I stepping on a stone or am I stepping on poop? Like,
Poop right now. Poop right now. So we'll put it that that's a great example though, because the context of it is that you spelled it out really clearly and how you even just in the conversation, noticing how you've been stepping stone to stone. Now, the speed you step is based upon your state of awareness,
mhm.
right? Your state of allowance is really what it is. Because when you're really aware, you are one in symbiosis. You're one in the synchronicity of life. So naturally, when your leg raises to step, there's no perturbation or no type of contraction to the mind, we could say, of that next step. And when there's no perturbation or no contraction to the mind and of the next step, we just take it at the moment that it's right. However, when the mind jumps in, we could say that's the level of freedom we're granted as human beings, is that we have the ability to mentally kind of miscreant ourselves a little bit and allow ourselves to play with the imaginative process of what do you think rather than just taking the next step. So it's almost like, with the real estate, you had let's say the real estate was three stones that you were walking. And like the first achievement, the first sell you get, you integrate that after a year or two in the real estate. And that's your first step you've taken as the first stone. And now your leg is automatically, going to the second one. And as it goes to the second one, it's like you say, the expansion of your clientele or expansion of your business in a way. And you take that next step and you take it almost fully naturally. And you're like, all right, things are working out. And that's when people typically, your average individual is, that's when work's going well or life's kind of hitting it in a way. And you start getting into it a little bit more. So getting into life. You're
Well, it becomes your identity too at some point. Like, this is who I am because it's working.
right. That's the catch. Is that when we start holding on to the identification of this is who I am, and we identify with the mania and paranoia that are present to say, take the next step, and there's still some sense of resistance to the mind, per se, we have an identification that's dissimilar from who we were, which is that pure sense of God happy. So, from that context of it, the reality being that next step is I'm not saying it's an easy one. I'm saying in flow, you just you're playing hopscotch. However, when the trepidation comes in, or when something of that paranoid nature comes in, um, of the opposition in a sense comes in, we hear how that next step could be, X, Y, and Z, whatever you might scary, could be dangerous, could be
Right.
whatever it may be. And then we hold back because we feel like if I take it, something's gonna change, something's gonna happen.
Yeah. If I'm not teaching yoga and I don't own Red Lotus Yoga, well, then who am I? I've done
Yeah,
this for so long. I lose my identity. I lose my state of my sense of who I think I am. If I didn't have that identity, well, making a change would be easy, probably, but I have that identity. And I love that identity. I do love what I do. I love my students. I love my business.
it's not a bad identification because it's not purely an ego that's reattached.
Yeah.
It's basically like you love the identity only because you can only love the identity when you truly sense a sense of happy from it. Because
Mm-hmm.
the reality is we can only identify, and this is where, it's really fun with psychology because, when you play with psychology and psychosynthesis and all of you read all this research that people have done on this mechanism of life per se. When people have when we've been researching life at the beginning, it's what we do. We study our lives. But those who wrote about it and those who studied it formally in the modern context, the reality is that it's completely about being present and taking that next step. And then what holds us back is what we call the ego. That's what the term, like if you actually look at the proper term of it, that I mean it's really the mind, the individual's mind that's holding them back. It's their reattachment to a certain thought. And we could break that down and say the reattachment to that certain thought has a conceptual component around it. And that circle of conception around the thought is what your mind calls an ego. Please broke down the ego, but that's the concept of what an ego is, and the transcendence of it is being able to let that thought be. Now, identification can actually, like the actual real identification, not just hi, my name is Brian, I have an ego because I said my name is Brian. That's not necessarily true. And ego is a sense of a true ego, a freed ego per se, is a sense of fully reattached. I'm fully reattached, and now I can explain that a little bit more. But the context of it is that when Brian is taking step by step and going forward per se, what's happening is he's not necessarily disiluding his ego. He's actually making friends with the parts of him through the mind that are dissuaded or uncomfortable with whatever the next step may be, while his ego is actually realizing its identification at the same moment. Because that's why you can say, I love my identity, because the only way you could say I love my identity is if the truth of your identification is the fact that you've actually realized happiness at a certain level.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise,
sure.
you couldn't honestly say I love my identity. So
Right.
from that consciousness of it, you obviously have a safe identification, which means that your ego isn't living in an attached state where it's constantly grabbing through an unawareness. It's just sitting a little more still for the step to be taken, but there's something holding it back. And that's where the mind is kicking in the sense of the moment that the ego meets the imaginative mind of what could it be? I don't know if I understand.
It's fear. It's
Yeah,
fear.
it's fear.
If I stay doing what I'm doing, what if I fail? If I leave, what if I fail? What will happen to my family? What will happen to my identity? More of an ego base. What will I mean? All that, like, it's why people stay in
Yeah,
horrible relationships and they stay in abusive situations
you got
because,
it.
I get it.
It's exactly, yeah.
So then the bigger question for me would be, I know that my ego is gonna take me for a ride whenever there's a big decision to be made about identity and self-worth and value and things like that. Yet I also know there's a part of me that understands flow state and can get into it easily.
Yeah, yeah.
How do I remind myself on a daily basis that I'm already in flow, I'm just not seeing it?
Yeah.
How do you remind yourself of that all the time, or be in that where,
That's a
because it's
tough one.
so easy to go off to
It is,
the what
and it's
ifs
a tough
and
one because that's living in happiness. That's living in happiness embodied. And the thing is that you're so correct. And I'll put it this way: for you, your suffering is much greater than we could say the conscious individual or even the everyday individual per se, even the ignorant individual. And the reason it is because of your exposure to happiness. Because again, it's a drug, right? So you've been exposed to it so many times, and every time you teach, you taste it.
I do.
That's what you do.
I
And
do.
when you taste it, per se, the innate sense of yourself says, "Hey, I'm here."
Mm-hmm.
And the second you get that innate sense of yourself saying, "Hey, I'm here," there's the part of you that says, "Okay, this is not necessarily the goal, but in a way, yeah, this is the goal."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
moment that life changes, whether externally, internally, or whatever it is, and those thoughts kick in that you mentioned, because you mentioned a couple thought patterns that were really great. That's the reattachment. That's where you're taken out of the flow. Is the second that you reattach these thoughts of fear, and then what happens is your leg doesn't move now.
Right.
And the nature is it's almost like the life within you and your awareness of happy is naturally picking your leg up, and it's naturally taking your leg and moving it to the next stone.
Mm-hmm.
However, when the mind hears the fear and we look at it and we reattach with it per se, that's the level of freedom we have as human beings. Is that's when our leg gets artificially stuck because we're in a delusion in a way.
Yeah.
And the moment we hit that, our leg, even though it's naturally taking a step, we self freeze it. It's almost like we use a conscious pull in a way that says, "Stay still, leg. I don't know if it's safe to move forward." But leg is saying, "We. What do you mean? Like, who's talking? Who's talking to me right now? I'm
Right.
you. Like, leg is you. Who's talking to me right now saying stay still, leg, or not to move when leg is already taking the step. But when
Right.
it's hearing that fear, in the sense of the mind reattaches and grabs it, that's you basically yelling at leg not to move. And when you're yelling at leg not to move, that's you holding that excruciating pose in yoga in a way, just to conceptually tie it in a little bit. But I mean,
Sure.
that is part of yoga in a way, is being able to say, okay, I'm aware of the excruciating pain that I'm in, or in the context of yoga, it's not, we don't look at it as pain, but the excruciating
Sensation. I'm
sensation.
feeling sensation.
Yeah,
I'm feeling
yep,
challenged.
yep. And at the same time, as being aware of it, I accept it and I'm going to allow it to be. And that's the first step to just accepting the fact that, yeah, I might be stuck in a little bit of, we could say, pride. And the pride is the false sense of attachment to this sense of yourself that is not fully identifying with being happy. It's like three-fourths of Brian is living in the enlightened state of happy. And one-fourth of Brian reattaches to the fear. And it's that
Mm-hmm.
one-fourth of Brian that reattaches to the fear that prevents the leg from automation, from being just natural and just playing hopscotch and skipping to the next step. And it's holding.
So
Now,
how does one manage that? Because I imagine everybody is
everybody,
somewhere on that same scale. Everybody.
everybody, you got it. That's the thing. Everybody has what they call the stick point. We're using you as an example, but it's everybody. Everybody has a stick. And by having that stick point, when we hear it in business, we hear it in all of these different regards, but every career path, every basis of whatever, every endeavor that anybody takes in life, even just someone saying who says I'm a mother, I say to they have a stick point,
Yeah.
and they'll notice they know where their stick point is. Everybody knows where their stick point is. Ask anybody, they'll be like, "Yep, I don't like my job, or my kids are overwhelming me, or this or that, or whatever it may be, whatever it may be." Everybody they have some sense of awareness of the stick point. It's just the fact that when you actually look at it as being a stick point and you give it that attention, now the mind is playfully looking at it. Um, the mind is now consumed through its imaginative conscious awareness, which is what we call delusion, because now it's imagining things that aren't necessarily real.
Right. Because that stick point is imaginary and it's a moving
Yes,
thing and it's
because
it's temporary.
the nature
Right.
of the being is moving your leg forward, whereas what we call the ego, which is the stick point in the mind, is actually holding your leg back when it's naturally moving forward, which is, if you think about that, a huge conflict because your leg is naturally moving forward while you're holding it back.
So is there steps to take or is it simply become aware that this is temporary and watch it move like to step back and go, oh, let's just watch the movie instead of being in the movie. You know,
Yep, yep.
is there like a technique, a tool, a process? Well, these are Nick's 5 guidelines for happiness, or is it
Yeah. So
just,
how do we get ourselves to live in the state of we could call microevolution until we get there? So it's basically the consciousness is like I'll put it in a little more simple sentence. How can I live in flow until I achieve flow?
yeah,
So the awareness simply is that yeah, part of it is being aware of it. It's being aware of the stick point. So it's kind of like you said, I'm aware of the feeling of being unhappy in these degrees. And instead of stepping back, actually, stepping back is usually what we do as a human being to look at it. But when we do that, we actually separate, our mind and our body, and that's where people start going into the imaginative state a little bit more, and to the delusive state a little bit more, because now they're separating their real per se from the unreal, which is what they think might, or the what if. You could use what they think might be a better word to use in the moment, but what they think might is the ego, and the what if is the ego compared to the natural step forward is the natural inclination. And the fight between the two, as long as you're aware of it, per se, observationally, will give some comfort, but there's also got to be engagement with it. Because the only way, if you think about when you're teaching, the sense of flow that you get is because there's an immersion. You're aware, but you're also immersed. You're not just sitting there and what people call, they don't necessarily call it this because it's an ununderstood term, detachment. You're not detached. It's actually, you're immersed. You're
mm-hmm,
so immersed through your awareness that you're happy.
mm-hmm,
And that's how we can actually define happiness is the full immersion of your awareness into what you're doing in a sense.
yeah. There's times where I'll teach a great class and people leave and there's just like they were moved. It was physical, it was emotional, it was spiritual, transformative for sure. And I'll sit there to myself and say, all right, I wish I could capture this feeling and spray it on myself every
Yeah,
morning to take it with me because it
I
was so
hear you.
powerful.
I
How do
hear you.
I stay there? Because then then there's a drive home and then there's a problem at home and there's a problem in business, there's a life just happens.
Well, it's like it's again, you've tasted ambrosia,
Yeah,
right? So once you've tasted ambrosia, can you drink anything else?
no,
Not necessarily,
I
because
don't want anything else. I just want to go back to that.
nothing is good enough.
It's like your first high or your first kiss or your first anything.
Yeah, it's nothing. It's again, it's that consciousness of once you've tasted the ambrosia, nothing is good enough any longer,
Right,
and nothing will be.
right.
And that's actually why, again, going back to some of the fathers of psychosynthesis and psychoanalytics and all, they talk about how the individual who's tastes it more and more ends up actually in more and more suffering because they naturally go through that microcosm of evolution from every taste they get. And the more they've tasted it, the more they can't live without. So you could call it her, look at it as like your wife, in a sense. So it's almost like saying like you can't necessarily live without her once you've been exposed to her.
Hmm.
Because now and the more exposed you get, it's from you flirting, it's turned into a crush to a full-blown romance in a sense. And in that romance you can't step away because the
Don't want to.
reality,
Yeah.
yeah, there's no part of you that will even have the capacity to, because the fact is that you've tasted happiness so fully that you actually have the awareness of its existence so clearly because of the amount of times you've tasted it, that the relativity of it is that you're gonna like anything that isn't pure happiness is gonna be a sense of suffering. and it intensifies because then again you taste it again, you taste more, you taste more.
So I've been
And
drinking a lot of ambrosia
you've been
for the
drinking a
last
lot of
23
ambrosia.
years.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
that,
that's exactly it. You've
and
been filling
because
your
of
cup.
that,
Yeah.
anything less than that just doesn't feel good.
Yes, exactly. You're not willing to settle any longer.
So then what do I do?
So that's the key. So the first one is kind of like what we talked about, what you hit today is, and again, we're using you as the most,
Yeah, I'm just using me as an example and being honest about my
this,
emotions.
the reality of it is, anybody who is, everybody has, a stuck point.
Yeah.
And their stuck point is, where a point in their life where their go button is being hit and they're not going because of something that's holding. And the more, like we said, someone has tasted or drank that ambrosia, you're not going to settle for anything less than ambrosia. You're gonna say, I only drink ambrosia. I've, you know, I've, I've tasted the taste. Everything else it's great, but ambrosia,
Yeah.
like you kind of have to have the ambrosia to even enjoy anything else.
Hmm.
So the consciousness of it is that, yeah, the first step is it's not detaching from it, it's being aware of it. So you kind of hit it when you said, like, do you observe it and just say, hey, okay, I can see that I'm here. And yeah, the first step is observing yourself on the rock, standing there with your leg naturally twitching to move forward, and then something within your mind saying, yeah, and that's the ego. So the ego, your mind, pulling your leg back, even though your leg naturally is filling with happiness and ready to jump forward. So having that awareness is the first step because then we can settle down a little bit to say, okay, I'm just kind of, I mean, leave it as a because it's like there's a little bit of annoyance and frustration with it because it's a sense of like, all right, so that's great. Now I'm aware of it. But then from that space, if you sit there and you stay in a sense of detachment, you say, I'll just observe it. I'm just gonna observe it. Nothing ends up happening, and they're moving. Because as much as life moves us and life will end up moving you, being consciously aware means I'm fully engaged in life, not that I'm detached from life. So when we have this awareness, we realize that just observing and waiting is great, but the immersion into the observing and waiting is it's a tough concept. I can break it down a little bit more, but the immersion into the waiting per se is actually what will speed up the process and allow someone to take that next step in a way.
So for
And
me, it's fully immersing myself even more, maybe in the
yeah,
needs of others, being of service, being the best version of Brian I can be, and just staying where I am on that rock for a little while. And then magically, that rock's going to shift forward all by itself. The river's going to push it, or it's going to push me
yeah,
off of it, or something.
yep. Okay, you got it. You got it. And as much as it kind of sucks to hear in many ways, it's almost like, yeah, embracing it so fully that you're ready for yourself to be even knocked off the rock onto the next rock.
Got
Because
it.
you're so immersed in it, in whatever ways you immerse yourself in it, the wave will hit you at a certain point and it'll force you to the next rock. But the only way for there to be any movement is actually the immersion.
Got it.
You have to immerse because when we observe and we say, okay, I'll just wait for it to kind of shift and it'll flow on its own. The truth is that we detach from it to the point that we go into a state of ignorance, get lost in the delusion of our mind,
Right.
and then we actually start chasing something else, and we don't even know why.
And
Like
so for
I'm
the
at the
person,
mall buying stuff, and I don't even know why.
right. So for the person working in a cubicle, you can sit there and hate it, or you can say, I'm going to fully immerse myself in what I'm doing and then allow the next thing to come rather than I'm just stuck here in this box all day long, 8 hours a day. Like change the perspective on it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. In many ways, it's immersing yourself in what is in the moment. I know that's a little cliche, but the honest truth is a little bit different because it's a little bit more difficult for most people to
Well,
really.
the idea of mindfulness is like a big thing now where everyone wants to be mindful. I want to be aware. I want to see what I want to be aware of what I'm doing. And and it's hard to do. Um, but it's the letting go of something that allows you to be present, essentially, paying
Right.
attention to what you're doing. But we're so distracted, we don't do it. So,
Right. Not getting so caught up.
yeah,
Right, right. It's basically the simplicity is not getting so caught up
yeah,
because when we're in the moment, per se, you can't help but be present and be aware. It's like there's something to our humanity that we have to bow and give credit to. And that's the fact that our humanity's nature is to live from that space. And because its nature is to live from that space, we realize that as long as I stay aligned with my humanity, I will never leave that space. However, every time I disalign from my humanity, I do end up leaving that space.
yeah. Stop being who you're not.
Yeah, exactly. Stop being or not. That's exactly it. So, how do I do that? Is actually, again, immersing yourself in who you are, which ideally would be immersing yourself in happy in every way possible, the point where you live in as much of happy as possible. So whatever is stimulating that state, you do more on. You do
Right.
more and more and more and more until it burns you out in a way to take the next step.
Yeah.
So
And not about manufactured happy like alcohol or drugs or video games or I'm going to watch so much YouTube that, not like that.
well, it could be to a certain level for a conscious individual like yourself, for example.
Yeah.
But it could be saying that I'm going to consciously immerse myself. It is the sense of saying I'm going to be selfish for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be so selfish that I'm going to focus on me as myself. I'm going to focus on what I like and what I would like to do.
Right.
And you do it because it makes you a sense of aware within the happy. But it's still not going to be enough. And even though you may be a sense of aware that it's not going to be enough, it's exciting enough for you to do it because that's where you're at. So then you just do it. And then when you do it, per se, you realize you'll burn out of it. It's like how we had the prior talk and I talked about the cigarette smoking and
Yeah. Yeah.
things like that. It's like when you do something consciously in that way and you say, I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna let myself just watch movies. Because what keeps me in this state of happy is um is uh is teaching and watching movies and spending some time with X, Y, and Z. You know, so if that's what's making you happy at the moment, it's saying that's what I follow. I follow the happy, no matter what. Follow the happy, and the happy is leading me home because home is true happy.
Got it.
So when you follow the happy, all that ends up happening is you observe yourself is not really how I put it, but you immerse yourself within it to the point that it turns into you naturally will observe yourself.
Got it.
It's just the nature of the being. So it's kind of like if someone was to broaden the question and to bring it back to you at the same time and create the link between the whole segment that we're shooting right now. The link is simply the fact that immersing yourself in what makes you even have a sense of perceived happiness will move you towards the next step.
And even if the job isn't it, maybe there's a thing in your life you can bring in and go, this feels happy. And then you're
Something.
like, okay, I'm going to now add a second thing in and a third thing in
Yep.
until it expands out.
Yep. You keep falling happy. Yep. Exactly. No matter what it is, you follow the thing that makes you happy. So it's like, all right, so working this job for these many hours, what makes me happy? So I'm only going to work these hours. Watching this TV show makes me really happy, and I'm gonna watch it for 6 to 8 hours a day. I'm gonna binge watch it. And what makes me happy is sleeping for 4 to 6 hours after that. And then, okay, I'm going to do it. So, I mean, I'm using just random examples right now at the moment, but the consciousness behind it is that when we immerse ourselves in happy, happy will lead you home. Happy is whom we are. So happy will lead you home. So coming back to the quote of stop being who you're not, it's simply who you are is happy. So anytime you do something that is in any way an antiverse to you being happy, you'll notice you'll lock. Like especially the right side of the body, the mouth, the physical side will
You
lock.
feel it in your heart. To me, I'll know when this is sucking my soul. I know when I'm not being who I am,
Yeah, yeah.
and I notice it. I'm aware of it, but sometimes you have to suck it up and do it. But in general, I get it.
And that's the
Yep.
tough part is that, yeah, so it's being able to balance yourself enough, but then also say that, if my awareness of what true happiness is real, which it is because I've tasted it, then it's worth the immersion per se.
Got
And
it.
again, it's always an exchange until we get there per se, and then it turns into a universal sense. So the exchange is simply realizing that the happiness is worth it. It's worth it because you already know it's worth it because you do anything to get it. Because if you look at the intention behind all of your actions, behind any human being's actions, it's to embody happiness. It's no matter what they're doing, no matter who you are, your deepest intention with whatever you're doing is to try, not even try, is to be happy.
Yeah.
So that's the deepest intention that you're working with. And when you're working with that intention is set in you whether you're aware of it or not. That who is aware of it is, one step ahead of the game because then they can allow themselves to do something that may seem silly, like watch 6 to 8 hours of YouTube a day and have thoughts that come to them saying, you're an idiot, like you're wasting your life, you could be doing so much more, you could be teaching 7 more classes, making so much money, and, all these thoughts that will come up, which are natural in a certain way. It's allowing those thoughts to come up and saying, no, I'm choosing happiness. I'm choosing happy over everything. That means that I'm going to be selfish. And when I'm selfish, selfish means, the word selfish, if you actually break down the definition of the word, it means, I'm going to be happy. That's really all it means. I'm going to do what makes me happy. I'm not going to worry about anything besides doing what makes me happy. It's not that bad of a word. And if you break it
Mm-mm.
down in that sense, I'm going to do whatever I enjoy and make me happy. Because if we look at it for most people, giving them the go on that is actually very safe. Yes, they're different people in different states of awareness or consciousness, and this is a different story. We call it mental illness. We can call it all these different names. We're going to call it who a little more coaching, a little more mentorship is a little more necessary. And yep, that's an open prospect. For those individuals who are in that space. But otherwise, we worship happy. And we say how we worship happy is to live in it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the greatest way to worship it. And when you worship the happy, it's initially when we're at a stick point and we're not allowing ourselves to see very clearly the path beyond the stick point, we just say, I'm going to stick with what makes me even perceived happy. Even if I'm sitting there watching YouTube and I'm aware, or even if I'm going to the mall, I'm aware that buying the necklace or buying the next car or watching YouTube isn't necessarily isn't me reaching the other side. It still is a perceived sense of happiness. And if you're aware of it, it's safe to say I'm just gonna engage in this selfishness of doing whatever makes me happy all the time. And when I'm in a perceived state of happiness, you actually notice agitation will start to build, frustration will start to build.
Yeah.
You'll start to get upset because it's not real happy. And you know what real happy is, but you're still in alignment with happy. So happy says, okay, listen, we've got to change and we're going to do this from this sense of happy, which is coming back to it, your true nature, your true sense of self,
Got it.
rather than trying to change in the sense of we never want to go through that word, the word trying, because the reality is that that's an opposition to whom we are. We're made of that. Our nature is that. We don't, to go through it is to commit suicide to one sense of self. That's a whole different talk in its conquest.
Yeah.
But
No, I get it. I mean, I feel like this is sort of like a good wrap up where when we were born with a sense of happy, that sense of purity, oneness, etc. Over the years, we've fall distant from it, but we're always chasing it. But because we always know it and have always known it, to come back to that and know when we're sort of when our actions are taking us away from it, and to
you
become
got it.
aware of that. And if you're like, I can't get out of this thing, all right, well then immerse yourself in it because you'll pass
Beautiful.
through.
You got it. That's
Okay,
exactly it. You
got it.
perfect wrap.
Now I just hope I can remember it tomorrow.
Well, the simplicity of it is, again, like I said, be selfish. That's the only memory. That's the only takeaway. That has to be that is necessary in a scenario when someone is stuck, per se. And we all know when we're in a stuck point. We all know it. We all know when we're in the repetitious. We're in the rat race in a way. So whenever someone is in a stuck point, it's time to be selfish.
Got
And
it.
it's sometimes for those of us who, especially having read and enjoyed a lot of the concepts of compassion and you know love in many degrees, it's tough to um say I'm going to have the giant tantrum and just say F it and step away and say, okay, that's how I avoid the suffering. Is I actually immerse myself into the hatred and the anger that I'm feeling in the moment towards what it is that's holding me back, and I let myself lash out on it fully.
Mm-hmm.
It's that's a little bit tougher for most people because the fear of someone won't like me, I'll be perceived as being mean,
Mm-hmm.
so it's a little bit easier for someone to say, I'm going to be lovingly selfish.
Mm-hmm.
And you can even play with the word of saying, I'm going to go and give myself a radical sense of compassion in a way of loving myself. And how I love myself is I allow myself to, and this is all a diabolical way to justify it, but it's the only way to get ourselves to do it sometimes. But the concept is I'm going to fully immerse myself is tough until we have a justification. And the justification is simply, you can think about it, what your happiness, gives the world, that it's the next path, it's the right thing to do. And, if you trust the person talking to who's telling you to do it, you do it. But the reality is that when we realize that when we're selfish, all we do is what makes us have a sense of happiness. We don't do anything that doesn't make us happy when we're being selfish. And when we're being selfish, we can then allow happiness to guide us, which is our true sense of self. And it can only guide us to good. It can only guide us to good. So we don't have to fear it. But for most people, there's that fear that comes up around being selfish, that there's something going to take it the wrong way. And say it's all about me. And then if you true to my selfishness, I act like this or this. And
Mm-hmm.
it truly is, if you truly allow yourself to be happy, you allow that because you notice you're happier if you let yourself express your feelings. And you notice, okay, yep, that might mean yelling at, blah, blah, blah at times.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, hey, well, it doesn't sound very nice. It doesn't sound very yogic or very loving, very,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is.
Well, but it's kind of like in a relationship sometimes when you need to say the unsayables to your partner or your coworker or your whatever, because it frees up all that space to come back to happy. Um,
Yeah.
it's the hardest thing to do sometimes. If my wife and I are having an argument, or I've got this perception about her, and I had, and I'm holding it in. I'm holding in. I don't want to hurt her feelings. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm being an idiot, and then eventually, like I need permission to say the unsayables. You say them, they hear them. They say theirs, they hear yours, and suddenly there's this whole new connection that's formed because you get the
Absolutely.
stuff out of the way.
Authenticity. You're more real.
And it's not done with hatred. It's just you got to get it out.
Yeah, it's just the concept is that I mean hatred is basically just a full claim over
Yeah.
our heart. It's a
Yeah.
claim feeling.
It's like, I love you enough to say this to you.
Yeah, to
And
be
I love
real.
you enough to hear what you have to say about it. And know that
Yeah,
we're still going to meet. And this is from you to a person or
that,
you to yourself, you know,
that's perfect.
hard
That's
truths.
exa- it's exactly what it is. It's being selfish enough to love yourself enough to say, I'm going to be fully authentic in a no matter what way.
Yeah.
And sometimes that may be me being a little pissy. It may be a little like this. It may be me acting a little like this. But
Right.
either way, I'm going to stay authentic to
Right.
who I am in the moment, no matter what, because I'm going to keep myself happy.
Right.
And
And
when
you
you
get away
keep,
from that illusion that happy has to look like all the time, right?
Mhm. Well,
That
the
ain't,
thing is, it's almost like saying that is what happiness looks like. So it's okay if you're pissed off that you don't feel like that.
yeah.
But when you're pissed off, that you don't feel like that. It's okay to immerse yourself in being pissed off about it.
Hmm.
Like it's okay to be upset. It's okay to have a tantrum of like what's going on? I'm so upset. I feel stuck. I feel this. I feel that. I feel all these feelings, and there's all this going on and that going on, and it's okay to have that explosion per se
Yeah.
because that is what drives us to being able to take that next gentle step to the next stone. Because our nature is gentle, our nature is kind, our nature is, fully. But at the same time, at moments we have the lash out in a way. And as long as it's a conscious lash out because it's coming from selfishness of following happy, it's going to lead you to take that next step rather than lead you to being stuck,
Yeah.
which I feel like is the biggest thing for most people is they
Yeah.
refuse to follow the authenticity of how they feel because sometimes their feelings feel so intense that they dislike their feelings and they don't express them
Right.
rather than just expressing how frustrated or agitated or whatever
Mm.
it is we are. And when we allow for that expression to come through so openly, what ends up opening from that is you end up getting closer to taking the next step because that interlinks with the selfishness of being happy is
Right.
being fully authentic. I'm
Right.
being myself. And the second you make the second you're being yourself, you'll notice even just saying I'm being myself and acting like how you feel for a moment, you suddenly notice I'm a little happier. I'm a little bit more. And the
Yeah.
more you do that, the more you stay authentic to yourself. Like authentic to yourself means it goes to the degree of saying, I wake up in the morning and oh, I'm actually gonna cancel my blah 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 because I'm watching TV today because that's what feels good to me. That's what I'm going to do. Why? Just because. That's what feels.
Mhm.
It's going to make me happy.
Yeah.
And it's not that I don't care at all. It's I care actually so much. That's why I feel like this. And
Right.
putting yourself in that spot. And if you can handle that, that would be, I'd say, the quickest way for you to get to the spot where you land in happiness, where you are, because what you're describing actually is energy, right? And when I say energy, I'm not talking about the metaphysical context of like, can we feel each other? We all can feel each other. We're all empaths. That's a different conversation that I can rant about on another day. This term has, driven me a little crazy in the sense of it's a very sacred term, but we as human beings are symbiotic and we do share how we feel. Everybody, we're all evoked as one in a way. And to think of yourself as having your, it's a whole different thing. But we'll talk about that. But
Talk
the
about for the next one.
concept being, the selfishness of saying, I'm going to be led through my sense of authenticity, through happy, realizing that I'm skipping stones and I will reach the other end. And reaching the other end can be looked at as an achievement at this point because, sure, why not? It's fine if that thought comes in. And when I reach out, then it's just knowing, because it's the knowing that keeps us going through the blur here. It's the knowing that when we reach the other end, that it all falls together. Because the other end is the embodiment of
Right.
and we have the embodiment of, we can't shift from it because you can't unevolve or again, once you're just drinking ambrosia, you can add to the ambrosia, but you're always going to be drinking ambrosia. You're
Right.
never
You're never going to want to drink dirty water again.
yeah, you're not
Even though
gonna
you might taste it, just to remind yourself, oh yeah, I don't
yeah.
like that.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
may even have appreciation, gratitude. You may even enjoy the quote unquote dirty water. But at the same time, your cup of ambrosia you still won't put down.
Yeah.
You'll never put it down. And that's the cool thing is that that's the microevolution is that we don't put our cup down, but once it starts to get more full per se, we do start to get a little bit more restless because we actually realize this cup is supposed to be completely full.
Right.
It's 3/4. This is get to the other end and fill my freaking cup.
Right.
Like that's where we really are at inside. It's just that we're not allowing ourselves to embody that so that when we get to the other end, we can have our cup with us and allow it to be filled to the point that we live from the space of the filled cup per se, rather than from a cup that we are looking to fill. And while we're looking to fill it, it's the surrender to happy. And the surrender to happy comes with a space of, we could say, the exert in the selfishness, which is very, very tough for, like I said, a lot of people to swallow because to be selfish usually feels, even though it'll stimulate happy, it feels through a perceived mind like we're doing something wrong. And that we can play with a lot, in a very, very deep way. Another segment too. It's like how someone feels guilt in their physical body, another person can feel that as happy.
Right.
Because guilt is just actually the attached thoughts to the physical sensation. And then you call that guilt, but then when it's the sensation itself is just it's energy, it's sensation.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at energy, as just like the very basic definition of energy, when somebody's living from happy, they have unlimited energy. They're living from a full sense of I feel so alive because they're immersed into life in every moment. When you're tired, you're not immersed in life.
Right.
When you're sleepy, you're not immersed in life. When you're groggy, you're not immersed in life. You'll notice that any time that you've ever been immersed in life, per se,
I just lost you. I can't hear you.
oh, did it cut out?
Yeah, there we go.
I will put it back in. But yeah, so what I was simply saying is that once you've been immersed at a certain level into, we could say, happy, you're not going to pull back from it.
Right. People say to me all the time, well, what, have you ever tried to do real estate again? I'm like, couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Can't go back. Can't go.
Because there is, let's just say there is a next step, but right now the next step is blind. So when you have a blind next step, that just means I'm stuck. I don't have an awareness. I'm unclear.
Right.
I'm
And then stay where you are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Stay where you are and follow the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And when the only truth you hear is the truth within you, and you follow that truth from a space of authenticity, happy will lead you to the next step, no matter what.
And then your cup fills.
Then your cup fills. Exactly.
That's a good place to finish.
Yep.
That's good.
Yeah. No, I feel like we hit it. I feel like your wrap that you actually made even earlier when you kind of wrapped up conceptually, I think that was great too. But I feel like the biggest thing and the biggest takeaway is simply when you follow happy, happy will always lead you to home.
I love it.
Stay full cup.
I love it. Nik, thank you so much. I love this. My day is brighter, and I hope other people's is too.
Thank you, Brian. I'm happy to share, happy to be here, and
thank you. Until the next one.
Yeah. All right, Brian.
All right. See you, bud.
See you.